Good morning from Panglao, Bohol, Philippines, and good afternoon, good evening to the rest of the world. Today's series of webinars seek to reskill and retool our delegates to this year's FIDEX 2020. Someone said that you cannot manage what you don't measure, and that is the purpose by which we endeavor to bring to you this morning a learning session on the return on your marketing investments. Today's businesses face greater challenges given the pitfalls, downturns, and other unforeseen events as consequence of the pandemic. But we in the travel and tourism sector, as we endeavor to safely, slowly, and sustainably reopen tourism, we also wish to ensure that your investments on tourism promotions marketing will be worth all the peso value that you put into them. We are fortunate to have with us a distinguished professor from the Asian Institute of Management, Professor Richard L. Cruz, to guide us through this morning's session on the return on marketing investments. As I wish you an enjoyable session this morning, I also remind you that Albert Einstein once said, "Not all that can be counted counts, and not all that counts can be counted." So I hope that in measuring the return on your investments, you will also keep in mind the intangible, non-measurable things that we derive from traveling together. Have fun!
Thank you very much, Tourism Promotions Board COO, Attorney Maria Antoinette Velasco Aliones. And with that, I'll be turning you over now to Professor Richard L. Cruz for his presentation, and he's going to be talking about measuring the return on marketing investment.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning to all of the participants of the Philippine Travel Exchange 2020. I'm very excited. I hope you can feel my excitement through our online platform. I'm very excited to be with you today. I'm very excited to be part of a travel and tourism event that's happening live in 2020. Can you imagine that? So I'm here coming from my house in Quezon City. And I was invited by the Tourism Promotion Board to join you today and give a talk about my thoughts on marketing return on investment and, I guess in general, many other issues related to issues of business development and marketing in this very challenging 2020 year and moving forward. Okay. So what I want to do is give a presentation. I have about 28 slides for my presentation. I think it's going to take me perhaps maybe about almost an hour. I would be very happy to answer all of your questions later. So as I present the slides, I would be very happy if you took screenshots of it. I'd be very happy if you posted questions immediately before you forget it. Post it immediately so that our moderator can ask these questions after the presentation later. And I'd be very happy to share this presentation with you. And also, I'd be very happy if you added me to your social network, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, or if you emailed me. So I'm going to show my email at the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, if there's anything that we can do to help your business thrive and survive in 2020. Okay. So I'll be sharing my presentation now. Okay, so I think this is part of the marketing management series. And the question posed actually to me was, Prof, can you help our participants, most particularly the sellers, understand how they can improve or measure their marketing return on investment? And, let me just give a little bit of background about how I understand this issue. As way of introduction, I just wanted to say that my organization, Asian Institute of Management, is deeply involved in helping many different kinds of organizations transform. So we are involved across many different industries. this particular year, we're very involved in industries like agriculture, education, healthcare, e-commerce, fintech. Okay, and today I'm working with the DOT and the Tourism Promotion Board as part of your event today. So we're going to be talking about tourism. So let me just say a little bit about what kinds of services I provide, or like what kinds of subjects I teach. So I consider myself to be a design thinker, systems thinker, complex thinker. And the things that I work on, the things that we design include products and services and experiences, business models. Lately, we've been more involved in strategizing how regions can develop. So we're working with different LGUs and different provinces in terms of helping them craft their development plans. And we're also heavily involved with certain sectors, certain industries. So we do develop strategies for industry level plans and roadmaps. So that part of the service, or that part of the field of study, we call that transformation design. We do a lot of business model innovation. We've been doing business model innovation for more than 10 years now. We started more than 10 years ago, mostly with the first industries that were disrupted by digital, namely telco, both telcos, and a lot of the media companies. Okay. So I'm also a proponent of customer centricity, marketing strategy, brand strategy. But I don't come from an advertising background. I come from a product and service management background. My first job actually was with Ayala Hotels. So I spent many years building various hotels. My initial projects included the original renovation of Hotel Intercon Manila, which does not exist anymore. And I also worked on projects like uh, Oakwood Hotel in Glorieta, and Insular Hotel and Marriott in Cebu. So I have a significant background in tourism, asset development, and asset management. I've been heavily involved in places like Davao and Palawan and Boracay. Okay, and I also teach and try to connect all of this business development and marketing ideas, and try to present that in a way that's acceptable to the shareholders and to the finance people. So we call that marketing metrics. Okay. So I'm going to take a fairly expansive approach to this topic this morning. And I just want to welcome everybody from government. I want to welcome everybody from the private sector. And my objective really is to be as helpful and as useful as possible to all of you. So please feel free to ask any and all questions. All right. So let's face it. The tourism industry in the Philippines is really, really important. Okay. And I would say that we're one of the countries in the world that has an economy that is quite heavily reliant on the tourism industry. Okay, the tourism industry, of course, is a significant direct and total contributor to the country's GDP, and that has actually accelerated in the last maybe 5 years. We know, of course, that it's a significant employer and job creator. So when this pandemic forced services to shut down, due to regulations related to social distancing, it really caused a massive, massive disruption to many households, because a lot of households, breadwinners, are actually working in the travel and tourism service sector. Okay. Of course, I think the other big contribution of the tourism industry is that it has a significant impact on the overall country branding that affects not just tourist arrivals, but it also really affects investments and other decisions related to other aspects of our country, not just the tourism aspect. Okay, and I want to really commend all the different contributors to all of the content that has been published across all digital platforms over the last several years, and the tremendous impact it has had on improving the image of the country, so much so that it's really we really became one of the most desired destinations to go to right before the pandemic. And I'm sure many of you had very high expectations for 2020. And the challenge really is, from a branding point of view, when you look across all of the different brands, tourism related brand assets of the Philippines, starting from, of course, our national brand and our national tagline, "It's more fun in the Philippines," and all of the variations of that, to all of the other brand assets of all of the popular destinations, all of the popular beach destinations. I won't name all of them or some of them because there's so many of them, but we do have so many world-renowned brand assets within the tourism and travel industry, and it's really imperative for us to make sure that they continue to create a positive impact for our country moving forward. So I want to talk about that a little bit. Of course, that requires a lot of investment. So, how do we make investments in brands? If, for example, much of the cash flow related to tourism has been disrupted. Okay, so how do we view that? And of course, one thing that I love about the tourism industry is that it's really one of the leading industries that's trying to experiment new products, new services, new business models in the area of developing more resilience and sustainable development. So we know that many resorts and many hotels have taken the lead when it comes to reducing the impact on the environment over the years. And of course, tourism has a very strong ability to decentralize development out of the urban centers, which really adds to the resilience of our economy. And I'm very glad to know, for example, that you're all there, or most of you are there in Bohol right now, enjoying this conference, of course, very safe and socially distanced from one another. But of course, being able to enjoy the nature and the culture and the historical aspects of Bohol. Okay. And I'm very happy that Bohol, through its ability to continue hosting these kinds of tourism events, is actually being very resilient in the face of all of this challenges and calamity. And that's also my hope for many other destinations, both large and small, across the Philippines. That through more prudent and maybe more self-aware and more responsive design of tourism experiences, that they can continue to generate a lot of tourism receipts, even if, for example, many of the large urban centers are still quite hampered by a relatively persistent infection rate of COVID. Okay. So, without going through the numbers, okay, I wish I had more up-to-date numbers, but I think if I looked at the numbers that I saw, most of them are quite negative or quite bad, especially those in the second and third quarter. But let me just ask really the question of the state of the tourism industry today, and how should we view strategically investments in the industry, and should we be bullish? Okay, and how do we understand the situation? Okay, so one of the favorite lines that I've heard throughout this year is this notion that the world has changed, but it's still filled with the same people. Okay, the world in 2020 is very different from 2019, but the reality is the people in the world in 2020 are more or less the same people that was on this planet in 2019. Okay, and so I would suppose that because they're basically the same people, their needs for travel and tourism, I think, remain the same. The needs remain the same. In fact, I would argue that for some of the motivations for travel, let's say for relaxation or getting away from it all, or the need to commune with nature, I think these needs have actually grown much stronger this year. So I really do believe that the demand exists. Okay. But the challenge really is that, of course, the preferences have changed. Okay. What they consider to be reasonable investments in travel have changed. Their perceptions have changed because of the constraints of the supply and what's available from the supply. So for me, really, and I was just talking about this with my class last night at AIM. So I'm running a product and service management class. And I was saying that the bigger issue for me really is that, given the fact that the demand, I think, is still there, is really we need to figure out from a product design point of view and from a service design point of view, how fast can we really reconfigure so that our products and services have sufficient hygiene level features that will satisfy whatever fears that they might have about the pandemic, but at the same time satisfy their needs for health and wellness, relaxation, getting away from it all, communing with nature, etc. I think what happened in Tagaytay last weekend Although it was quite sad that perhaps there was maybe some miscommunication or miscoordination. But I think that the fact that it trended on social media that everybody wanted to go to Tagaytay on the weekend, uh, given just a press release from one office, without any large amount of money being invested in advertising or awareness building, etc. That in behavioral economics we just call this signal. No, you don't even need to incentivize them. You just send the signal that things are open, and without too much investment, the customers will already arrive and they'll knock on your door, and they will inquire, because really the motivation right now is very high to get away from it all. So I think that's really where the state of the industry is right now. I think there is a lot of pent up demand. There is a lot of motivation to purchase and to travel. And the industry really needs to seriously figure out, from a product point of view and from a product feature point of view, how can it ensure that it has the hygiene features at least to unlock that demand. Okay, so the question that I was asked really to focus on was, in my opinion, what I call a business question. Okay. So, and the business question really is, how do I measure, or how do I ensure that I can improve my marketing return on investment? Okay. So, what I just wanted to start with really is just a very simple formula that just gives you a simple idea of the economics or the drivers of marketing investment. Okay. So if you look here, it just basically says, gross profit, or maybe for many other hospitality businesses, maybe something more like operating profit. So what is the operating profit minus whatever investments I've made across the whole customer journey? No? Investments in creating awareness, investments in content, investments in sponsorships, investments in platforms, in CRMs, all of the marketing related investments, from awareness all the way down. And I'll show that in a bit, all the way down the whole customer journey, and then divided by the total marketing investment. And the rule of thumb for many is about, I would say the rule of thumb is probably about 5 to 10 times. Okay. The ideal marketing return on investment should be about 5 to 10 times. Okay. And I think the implication of what I was saying earlier about the fact that, especially now, given that there's a lot of pent up demand, I would assume that today, any investment in any tourism related product that has the right hygiene features, any investment in marketing would actually have a much higher ROI, probably in the in the tens or even higher. Meaning that you don't need a lot of effort right now to convince people to come, as long as several factors are there, like they trust your brand and they trust that you have the right hygiene features. Once you get over those challenges or those objections, I think you don't need to sell them on the other reasons why they need to travel in 2020. There's just one big elephant on the table that needs to be addressed. Okay. Will I be safe, and will I not be breaking the law? Okay. I think if you can answer those two questions through some kind of pivot in the design, that your marketing this year will actually be quite efficient. Okay. Now, the other thing is that, normally when we talk about the business question, we really have to understand that, again, as I was trying to say, that the business question on ROI really hinges also on how well we understand the human question or the problem of our customer. Okay. And it's really hard for me to talk about marketing ROI without really saying that any attempts to improve marketing ROI has to be found in our ability to align our offerings more closely and more tightly with our customer needs. Okay, so I'm going to be talking both about the business question and the human question as we move forward about ROI. Okay, so let me just start off by saying that the world is becoming more complex. Okay. And when we say complexity, there's a difference between complexity and complicated. Okay. There's a difference between complexity and complicated. And tourism actually is what I would call complex. Okay. It's not complicated. But maybe the first two ideas I want to talk about complexity is that complexity means that everything is interconnected and interdependent. Okay, everything is interconnected and interdependent. So what that means is that the business question is always connected to the human question, okay, or the business objective is connected to the customer objective, all right, and it is interdependent. Okay, and the question, of course, is maybe like causality, which one needs to be solved first. Okay, and I think when we talk about customer centricity, when we're trying to convince customers or companies to be more customer centric, what it means is that we really need to be very self aware about our customers' changing needs, and be willing to abandon old ways of doing things when we know that the old way of doing things is no longer aligned to the current customer's preferences or needs. Okay. So the belief has to be that your business will have a good marketing ROI. Your business will have a good sustainable cash flow only if your solution or your product is really attuned to the customer needs as of September 21, 2020. Okay. So to be quite honest, it's very possible that you could have been the best hotel or resort or travel agency in 2019. You could have been the best. You could have won many awards. But if today the customers, for some reason, find that your offering is not aligned anymore or tuned to their needs, that there's no assurance that your award in 2019 will garner any loyalty or any maybe may not be perceived as relevant in 2020. Okay, and we really need to be humble enough and self-aware enough and sensitive enough to understand that. Okay, so what I'm trying to also say is that just to understand this notion of the sustainability of your business. Okay, from a marketing point of view, maybe I can just simplify it and say there's really just two kinds of customers that really matter to you now. Okay, so this is just me trying to simplify it in one aspect. Okay, I know that there's many other facets to it, but let me just try to simplify it this way and say, if I were in your shoes, let's say if I was in the shoes of a GM running a tourism property or a travel agency, etc., my immediate reaction to this crisis would be to do the first item here, which is to leverage my existing customer database and to leverage or to develop relationships within the existing customer database and understand what needs do those customers have and try to experiment and find ways to satisfy those tourism related needs. Okay. And if you notice, the reason why I start with this is because ideally, you don't need to spend money developing this database. Okay. This is an existing asset of your business. So the idea really is to improve the marketing ROI of your money, of your limited money today. I would assume that it's better to start with the names that you already have rather than try to spend money and generate new names that you don't have yet. Okay, so between the two, I would say the first one would be a higher priority strategy or activity to take, simply because I would say it's easier to generate new revenues off of known existing names. And of course, these people should have a stronger brand equity or brand awareness of your brand. And they probably, hopefully, would be more willing to buy something from you down the line. Okay. Of course, the second way to generate revenues and profits moving forward is to generate new customers. Okay. So these new customers are either already aware of you, but they haven't purchased from you yet, or these are people who are not yet aware of you and you still have to invest a little bit more money to create that awareness and to create that excitement so that they would engage, for example, with your platform, with your website, so that they might buy something from you moving forward. Okay. So that's my first sort of kind of practical tip from a marketing ROI point of view. Leverage your existing marketing assets. Leverage your existing marketing assets. And for many of the businesses here, the existing marketing assets should be number one, your brand equity in your customer database. Okay, that is probably your biggest marketing asset, which is a result of investments you've made from the past. And right now, basically, is the time to leverage those investments you made in the past and see whether you can generate some kind of new revenue stream from that. Okay. So I would be happy if people would have questions about this later. I would be very happy to talk about specific examples with you. But this is the order. Okay. So I'll go deeper into this in a bit. Okay. So as I was saying about complexity, um, I started in the tourism industry in the early 90s. Okay, so I hope that most of you started later than I did. Okay, so I started in the early 90s. I told you that after college, my first project was the renovation in 1992 of the Hotel Intercon Manila. And my boss was actually Fernando Sobel, who was a young 30-year-old in Ayala Land in the old days. Okay. And I will just say that, that was my first experience working with a global, international hotel management company. That was my first time working with many other travel agencies who were partners of Hotel Intercon Manila, et cetera, et cetera. And for many years after that, I will just say that there are so many best practices within the hotel industry. Okay, let me just repeat that. There are so many best practices in the was quite high because there were so many um, best practices that people could leverage from. Okay. The challenge today, though, is that we're moving away from best practice. We're moving away from best practice, and the challenge really moving forward is what we call. So on the left side here, it's what I call emergent practice. Okay. The challenge today for the whole tourism industry, not just accommodation, but travel, airline, attractions, entertainment, cultural, historical, transport, logistics, everything, merchandise, products. The challenge today really is in our ability to be self-aware of which best practices don't work anymore and our willingness to abandon those best practices as soon as possible. And our ability to create the next generation of practices moving forward. Okay. I know that this is not easy to develop new and emergent practices because I know that for many businesses, a lot of the practices have been codified well. And many of those practices were brought from one property to the next property, etc., and replicated in so many other properties. But I would say that 2020 is really the year when even the most senior people in the industry, most especially the most senior people in the industry, need to take a look at what I call the response to complexity, which in this slide, as you see, the response to complexity is emergent practice. Okay. And the short recommendation or the short prescription for developing emergent practice really revolves around the idea of experimentation and learning and trying something new. Okay. So right now, I would argue that it's very hard for me to give you a list of the top 10 best practices that will ensure high market ROI. Because right now, I would say a lot of the best practices that existed before the pandemic may not necessarily be the best practice anymore today. All right. I'll give you an examples. Maybe something along the lines of digital marketing. I know for a fact, for a very strong fact, I've seen it with my own two eyes, data that really indicated that for many businesses, investing on Facebook for paid advertising was a very good investment, meaning that the cost to generate leads and the cost to acquire was relatively low versus the actual margin generated by each customer. Now, that was before the pandemic. Now, today, given that all the businesses have been forced to move to the digital platform, and I would assume that maybe 8 or 9 out of 10 businesses, their first choice for advertising is probably Facebook in 2020. That right now, I'm not really sure as to how much noise or signal to noise ratio there is. I'm sure there's a lot more noise now, given the fact that many businesses are struggling to generate attention through Facebook. So I would hazard to say that I am not as confident as I was last year to say that Facebook is the way to go. In fact, I would argue that for some of you, making an early investment on platforms outside of Facebook will be more beneficial for you in the long run, simply because I feel that the whole user experience on Facebook is becoming too busy, too toxic. And I feel like we're reaching a tipping point where more and more people will be turning to other platforms to get their information about other things, especially discretionary spend items like travel. Okay. So, what I'm more focused on is trying to emphasize the point that in order to increase our marketing ROI, we need to have a mindset of developing emergent practices uh, in relation to how we create awareness and how we engage our customers. Okay. So this is really the VUCA conversation that I'm sure you've had already from many other forums. Um, but it's true. Okay. This is a reality. But for many of you, I hope that you will view this as an opportunity rather than as a threat. I hope that you will view the fact that we need more emergent practice as an opportunity to learn and try something new and offer something new rather than as a threat to all of the systems that you've built that were based on best practice. Okay. So before I move to the next slide, let me just re-emphasize one more time. Best practice is still okay if it's working. Okay. You can still do the things that you do to your customer, or you can still do the things that you do based on your old best practice, let's say in your operations, if they still continue to work. Now, what do I mean by continue to work? That it's still relevant to the customer and it's still earning you money from a business point of view. Okay. But once the old business model or once the old way of marketing the product doesn't work, meaning nobody is buying, nobody's interested, nobody's inquiring, then that should already be a signal to you that what used to be best practice is no longer going to work. And the direction forward really is emergent practice. Or unless you want to wait for somebody else to experiment and see what works with other resorts or hotels or other tourism related institutions or companies or organizations and then copy. Okay. So if you want to wait before you try something new and you'll stick it out first with the old ways of doing things and you'll wait to see somebody else prove it first, then that's fine too. But basically, you'll have to wait a little bit for the other organizations, the other innovators to see what works. Okay, and hopefully they don't build too much of an advantage over you by the time you find out what it is. Okay, so just to emphasize, how do I maximize my marketing ROI in 2020? My first recommendation is exploit known, viable, still viable business models. Okay, so I don't know which of your business models are still viable, which products, which product lines, which services are still viable, still profitable in September 21, 2020. If you don't have any viable business models as of today, of course, you can wait for it to become viable again in the future, hoping that everything will go back to a way or a world where your product was viable. Or you'll have to go for number two, which is really to pivot whichever was disrupted and really try to experiment with new value propositions. Okay. Now, sorry, I think my Okay. So I think the problem here is the word experiment, experimentation. So if there are CFOs out here or controllers, for them it's very hard to understand what does experimentation mean from a financial investment point of view. Okay, how do I check or how do I sign the check that gives money to somebody who's trying to experiment on something new? Okay, how do I manage that experimentation? And in the field of business model innovation, that's what we really call innovation accounting. Okay, innovation accounting. All right, meaning there has to be an agreement among the managers of an organization, knowing that sometimes money will be spent on a known activity that is known to work, and therefore I need to hold that activity accountable for the results. Okay, so as an example, if your organization has been advertising on Facebook for a long time, and you know pretty well already how much or how many responses or conversions you get from a Facebook ad, so you would probably know the cost to convert or the cost per lead or the cost per customer. If you're doing the same thing and you're holding that activity accountable by measuring the results, computing the ROI of that campaign, as long as it's still making money, good, keep on doing it. But once you see that you spend the money but nothing is coming back, and you spend it again and nothing is coming back, and you spend the money again and it's not coming back, and then you decide, okay, maybe we need to change the brand or the color of the ad or the wording of the ad, and it's still not coming back, then you know that there's something deeper that's wrong, and that's really now the signal to say that I need to experiment. Okay. And when we go into experimentation, it's really trying to find out what works in a world of unknown. And you really have to change the way you view the concept of return on investment. Okay. So, what are the economics of experimentation? Okay. So if you look at the startup world, for example, they say something like only 1 out of 10 or 15 startups actually survive. Okay, so that's like saying the chances of success is only 7% or 10% chance of success, finding the right startup or product. Okay, now I'm not really sure whether the probability of success of your experiments will be that low. Okay, later on, I'm going to be talking about several concepts about some kind of maybe some new tourism concepts that could be a basis for experimentation. And you can gauge the probability of success or failure of some of those ideas. But I think what's critical is that when you know that it's an experiment, you really have to suspend the old way of measuring return and the old way of holding that investment accountable. This is where the finance people and the marketing and sales people have to come together agreeing on how the money should be invested and what are the measurements of success. And I would say that the measurement of success, actually, the ROI is not going to be what I showed earlier about profit divided by investment. But any money spent on an experiment is really good. The measurement is going to be how much did I learn about my market in relation to what I spent. Okay. So before I move off this slide, I guess the last idea here is that if you try something new, like a new campaign, or a booth, you rented a booth somewhere and you sold, and let's say nobody bought, 0 people bought, is that a failure from a marketing ROI point of view? Yes, if you calculated it based on profit minus investment divided investment, that's a failure. But if you measure it in terms of like, what did I learn or what did I validate, you can argue that because I spent so much money, now I know exactly what not to sell. And I know it with a high level of certainty that I shouldn't sell this. Okay. So in that sense, that's how you would calculate the return on investment. It's more of the learning rather than the profit. All right. So, let me just become more specific here and answer the question, the business question. How do we restart the business? And perhaps what kinds of investments will it take to restart the business? So, again, my background is product development. I started my product development career in the hotel business in Ayala Hotels. So I'm very clear about the different categories and the potential for the creation of new categories. And as you create new categories, you need to restructure and reframe the features of the products within those categories. So I will argue that uh, perhaps like the education industry, the education industry has been so severely disrupted by this pandemic that I seriously doubt whether any school in the Philippines will ever go back to the old way of doing things completely. My guess is that for most schools, there will always be forever some level of hybrid learning forever. Okay. And the biggest challenge now among educators and educational institutions is to figure out how to make this model financially sustainable, because of course all of the customers right now, the parents and the students, are expecting that because my child is not on campus, the school should be starting to charge lesser tuition. But the reality is many of the costs of the school are not exactly only related to just the facility cost. Okay, so we can already see it in the education industry that this is an industry that is going through great transition, and it's my honest belief that the same thing should be happening in the tourism industry. Okay, I think the only difference is that because education is not a discretionary item, but it's a must-have service. It's not life or death like healthcare, but it is a service that is needed by all people of different ages. And that's why there's a level of urgency to schools being fast in creating new kinds of learning categories, new product features, etc. Okay, so for example, like homeschooling as a category is booming right now. Okay, I'm not so sure in the tourism industry. I haven't maybe spoken directly to enough people to formulate a very strong opinion about the sense of urgency. I know that the industry is bleeding money because technically, the business has technically stopped. But I don't know exactly what is the motivation for them or for you to experiment in item number one here, which is really new category and new product development, primarily powered through a new digitally transformed experience. Okay. And of course, related to that, the second bullet will be we really need a new value proposition, which builds on the existing brand equity that you have all built over the years. Okay. The third item here, of course, is as I was saying earlier, we really need to mine the customer databases. So this is where your investment in data privacy should be coming in, right? Because if you have good investments on data capture and data privacy, hopefully a lot of people were able or were willing to share you a lot of their data. And hopefully today you're able to mine all of that data and develop and manage relationships with, and allow them to manage and develop new relationships with you. Okay, maybe even suggesting new products and services, in the context of open innovation, create new content for you. So I'm sure a lot of people this year have seen the trends on social media where people were posting old travel content, pictures, videos, etc. But I don't know how much of that was actually started intentionally by travel or tourism brands. I think mostly they were started by people who were just bored at home and just wanted to see their friends' old travel pictures. Okay, but the fact that people have stopped temporarily traveling physically, does it mean that they also have to stop generating content for their favorite tourism brands? Okay, or customizing new products and services. All right. Now, just one additional idea now. When you look at food service, the food service business, uh, all the trends before the pandemic were that all the movement was the dining out, branded dining out. Okay. And consumption of food at home was going down. All right. Now that trend has completely flipped. It's completely flipped. The food industry now is heavily product biased. Okay, because the food service side of the business has been heavily affected. Now I'm curious to understand also whether that flipping and trend will also happen in the tourism industry, whether it's really viable or possible for the tourism industry to take the same brands, but instead of having a service business model only, trying to exploit a product business model where some of these products can be consumed by people at home, as an example. Okay. So these are just some trends on how business models of other industries have changed in the service industry. And I'm just curious to see whether that's going to happen or not in the travel business. Okay. So, of course, maybe it's a little bit more challenging. Food is, again, a necessity. It's at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, physiological. But I'm curious to see how this evolves moving forward for the travel industry. Okay. Now, the fourth point really is this one. Um, we have to be, I don't want to throw about digital transformation loosely because I think never before has our country been digitally connected as it is today. Never before. 2020 is the year where I would say the number of connections of people digitally are at its highest, and the amount of consumption and screen time is also at its highest. Okay, so if you're not aware, Philippines has perhaps one of the longest average internet usage times of any country in the world. Okay, so there was some research that came out last July that said that the Philippines was number one in internet usage at about 9 hours plus per day. Okay. And number one also in terms of social media usage at about almost 4 hours a day. We were not number one in percent of the population connected, but I'm sure because of what's happened in education, that the number of households connected to the internet has increased significantly, much faster than in previous years. So I would argue that in terms of the digital transformation and connection, the Philippines has never been more attractive. Okay. But I would argue that what we really need, especially from the tourism perspective, is we need to leverage that digital technology to humanize our brands even more. Okay, so it's interesting for me to see that so many properties or organizations have multiple digital assets, digital platforms. They're on IG, they're on FB, they have a website, they're on OTAs, etc. Yet, it's very difficult to have a person-to-person conversation with any of these properties. It's very difficult to get some kind of human insight as to like how these properties are evolving. Okay. So if you look at my number 4 item here in relation to the business question, I'm not emphasizing actually the digital transformation. What I'm really emphasizing is how can we create that human connection and that human engagement, which is what the customer really wants now. They don't necessarily just want convenience, but they want the assurance of a person on the other side that everything will be okay. But that relationship can only be enabled through strong, trustworthy digital platforms. Okay. So this is my initial take about some of the investments that will be needed moving forward. Okay, so one of the more popular visuals that I have taken from Steve Blank, and this is something that we use with all of our startup students at AIM. It's really this way of defining the marketing strategy across the whole customer conversion cycle. No? So the acquisition of customers get, the retention of customers keep, and the growing of our market share, of our wallet share of those customers, or growing the engagement with these customers through growth strategies. Okay. So technically speaking, there should be marketing activities for each level of this two-sided funnel. Okay. So there should be clear investments in activities for awareness building. There should be clear investments, for example, in content, and developing your branded platforms that handle all of this content management through interest related activities, and so on and so forth. No? So we need to be investing in all of the digital touch points, whether there's some kind of user interface, some kind of content, so that we're really managing the whole user experience across. so that we can manage all of our marketing objectives, which is to get the customer, keep the customer, and grow the customer. So I would argue that, if we had a session or a workshop with each of your organizations, that this framework would be the best way to measure the flow of people across the funnel and to see how much money you spent at each level and what was the conversion rate at each level, to see the efficiency of the investment at each level of this funnel. Okay, so this is what we do now, and I would argue that the most important metrics today in marketing in general are related to the conversion, the number of people I can convert from left. So the leftmost is unaware to aware, interest, consideration, purchase. So what is the conversion rate of from awareness to purchase? And how much money did I spend in total to convince so many people to purchase? And eventually, what was the cost to acquire? Okay. So if you go to your marketing ROI, the cost to bring a person from awareness to purchase, okay, the average cost to bring one person to purchase based on your spend is the marketing investment. And the margin you earn on that person is basically the operating margin. So your marketing ROI basically is the margin from one customer minus the investment to acquire that customer and the investment to maintain that customer. So if you understand that logic, that's basically what we call customer lifetime value. All right. And I will just say that my own experience with many tourism organizations is that unfortunately their business models are not deep on the customer relationship side. Most marketing operations just focus on get. And once the customer consumes whatever they bought from you, there's very little marketing investment on the right side. There's very little investment on the retention, and there's very little investment on the growth. And I know that personally because I don't get any email from the resorts that I've stayed in the past. I don't get any SMS or email from any of the travel agents that I might have used in the past. I don't necessarily get a lot of content from the OTAs that I've used in the past. Okay, because all of those marketing activities would be indications of retention and growth. Okay, so I don't get that as much, and what I see really more of is investments on content, mostly from a product discovery point of view, from a destination discovery point of view, from a customer acquisition point of view. Okay, so all I'm just saying here is if you look at this slide, the investments you need to figure out where is most of my investments happening now. Did they used to happen in the get side? Now I am recommending that if you have a healthy database that's already at your access right now, maybe you need to start spending more money on the grow side. Okay. All right. So, going back to the human question, let's talk about the human question again a little bit. So, of course, when we invest money in all of these new touch points or products, we just really have to have some understanding of what the customers are doing, thinking, feeling, think, feel, do, no? Mentally, cognitive, affective, behavioral. Think, feel, do. So here's an example from Google, very popular about 4 years ago. Google talks about the micro moments in the journey of a traveler. So this comes from their website, Think with Google. And they talk about 4 micro moments in the journey of a traveler. The dreaming moment, the planning moment, the booking moment, and the experiencing moment. So I assume that many of you know this already, so I'm not going to elaborate too much. Of course, I think Google's point here is that as the years have gone by, most of these moments have become more digitally driven and they've become more mobile driven, which is the point Google wanted to make, right? That most of these moments are happening on mobile, and therefore your investments should be more mobile friendly, mobile ready. Okay. So we know that this is happening. We know that these are the key stages of the journey. So what we do from a product and service development point of view is we try to understand, so how have these considerations changed? Okay. So we need to understand how can we reframe the messaging around the current mindset towards motivations for travel. Okay. How do we reframe connecting to nature today? How do we reframe the need for cultural experiences today? How do we reframe the need for interpersonal experience today? So this is quite important because of social distancing. No? And then, of course, how do we reframe the need for people's self-esteem and self-actualization? So I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, many people were saying, don't let COVID-19 get in the way of you trying to accomplish your dreams and trying to become the best version of yourself. Okay. So if people believe that we're not going to allow COVID to get in the way of my dreams and to be the best version of myself, the healthiest version of myself, the most creative version of myself, then for many people that will include travel. Okay. So it's really a challenge now to figure out how do we reframe the messaging and the experience. And maybe what I can offer from my own point of view is that I think what's happened is it's like, if you know Star Trek, it's like I feel like I'm teleporting every day. It's like I'm going on the teleporter every day. And that's how my life has become. Okay, so I'll give you an example of what I mean by teleportation. So before, when we talk about live, work, and play, we had different places to go to for live, work, and play. Okay, so, we would live in residential places, and then in the morning, we would drive to work. Literally, everybody would be driving or commuting to work. That's why Metro Manila has one of the worst traffic situations, for example, in the world. Okay, so for many other cities, it's the same thing. We would drive to work, and then maybe after work, we would go to a third stop for play or relaxation, and then go home. Okay. So, the whole real estate business, and to a certain extent, the whole tourism business was built on this notion that there was a time for work, there was a time for living, and there was a time for playing. And I'll argue that, tourism captured a lot of the play in terms of like, personal individual travelers traveling for adventure or experience. And then, of course, work, when we talk about MICE, business travel, etc. The tourism industry captured a big chunk of the expenditures when it comes to live, work, play. Okay, but now we are all work from home. My kid is studying from home. We're all doing this online. So the question is, what is the need now for play or relaxation, etc., when we're always physically in one place right now, more or less, and we're doing all of the things that we used to do in life? Okay, so I have questions here on the right side, like what are the emerging lifestyles? How will this impact the who, what, where, when, how, and why of the lifestyle? Okay, so it's funny, right? I'm here in my living room. I'm giving a very important workshop to a very important group of people. But right after this, I'm just gonna walk like 10 steps and I'm gonna have lunch here in the dining room of my house and I'll be with my son. It's like teleportation. Okay. So now that I can do this from anywhere, I've been thinking and I've been talking to my son, you know what? Maybe we should just move out of the city, build a beach house somewhere. So I do have a beach property here in Southern Luzon. Thankfully, it has access to good internet. So there seems to be a viable possibility that if we did move there, we would be able to continue our existing lifestyle, but this time better because then my house would be next to a beach with some wind, closer to nature, outside of the city, perhaps a little bit safer versus the pandemic because it's less populated, etc. Okay. So a lot of this has changed, right? So we really need to reframe how our products and services fit within this new emerging lifestyle. And the only way we can do that, I believe, with some level of detail and insight, is to really invest some money in understanding the new traveler's journey through a journey mapping exercise so that we can find the key insights, so that we can make the right experiments and reduce the risk of failure, improve the chance of profitability so that our ROI can increase. Okay, so all I'm saying here is that I think in 2020, there is a greater need to invest money in customer insighting. And I'm not talking about the traditional market research and survey research only. Okay, if you know me, I have some reservations about being overly reliant on survey research because people are not necessarily honest when they're answering surveys. They're more honest when you're asking them whether they want to register and give their email and credit card number or not. Okay. So we have to design experiments in a way that work, but to get the insight needed to design that experimental product, we need to invest money in something like journey mapping. So this is meant to reduce the uncertainty of whether or not the customer is willing to buy our new product with the new value proposition. Okay, so the example of the product I was thinking of was building a co-working and co-living space designed for people in Metro Manila to go out and maybe spend a week there just to break the monotony and then let them come back to Manila to their regular house and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to maybe sell it on a per weekly basis to somebody who just wants to take a week off, but not a week away from work, right? They're still going to work there from the house there, but it's just that they're going to be based in the beach. Okay. So I think that's like a new category of product. That's a new kind of bundle. And there needs to be some experimentation as to whether or not there's really demand for that kind of product or service. Okay, so as I was saying earlier, here are some examples of some profiles that I was thinking about. Just trying to understand the human problem more deeply, right? So maybe we need to go and invest money in this exercise. So for example, I have a new segment that I'm proposing, solo segment. And the solo segment says, since I can telecommute and work from anywhere, why should I stay in the city? Maybe I feel like it would be awesome to work and be able to run to the beach in the afternoon. And I can share pictures with my office mates that after our meeting, I just ran to the beach so that there's some self-esteem there. And then the do is I need to find an affordable place to stay with fiber and AC that's near the beach and book it for 2 weeks. Okay. Now, if I try to do that now on the existing platforms, whether it's an OTA, Airbnb, Facebook, etc., it's not that easy. And I don't necessarily think that there are a lot of products out there that's being marketed to this segment with this value proposition. Okay. Knowledge workers. So there's a lot of knowledge workers now, designers, teachers, writers, etc. They're understanding now that working from home has a burnout effect. Being connected always has a burnout effect. And what they really need is to do something called deep work. So you can do research on the deep work concept or the 3-day effect concept. And they feel like, you know what? I deserve to actually just disconnect from the rest of the network. I need to find a place where I can disconnect and to self-actualize and maybe to just be the best version of myself. Okay. So I need to design a 1-week trip, a 3-day deep work session, and a 3-day walkabout in nature to experience awe. Okay. So maybe that's like another emerging segment. And then, of course, families. And I think we've already been seeing this on Facebook already. I can learn and work from home, from any home. So I'm excited to create new family experiences, behaviors, and patterns. These are all high-level needs. And what I want to do is I want to move around and rent a different house with good fiber and ensure work and study schedule for 2 weeks and bring all the materials on the trip. Okay. So I know that's happening now for sure because I know, I will not say who, but my friends and their families have been doing this because they need a break from, you know, just the consistent grind of doing this at their house continuously for so many months. You know, so back to the business problem. How can I ensure the sustainability of the tourism business? All right. So in short, what I'm really trying to say is that the only way to ensure good return on investment now is we need to change our business model, meaning we need to change our value propositions, our channels, the way we do our customer relationship. And of course, we need to change the back end. We need to become more digitally dependent. And ultimately, if you look at the bottom of the business model canvas, what it will say is that it will change your revenue streams and it will change your cost structure. And these are the things that we need to change right now, because if our revenue stream is heavily dependent on packing a lot of people in a small space, that's not a very attractive idea for a lot of people right now. We need a different business model where we can make money and be more aligned with the new preferences of the customers. Okay, so business model innovation. Again, we need to be clear about our investments in activities that support a get strategy, a keep strategy, and a grow strategy. And again, just to reemphasize some of the metrics that we need to focus on: response rate to specific offerings with specific messages, so A/B testing. Okay, conversion rates from one stage to the next. So how many people uh, went from clicking your link on this page to this page, and how many people actually inputted their email address? Okay. Cost per lead, eventually, cost per acquisition, and customer lifetime value. Okay. So I won't go into these metrics in detail. I'm sure Google is full of resources that you can research just to understand these concepts more deeply. And let me just end my presentation by talking about a summary of the key transitions that I think are needed so that we can have a much improved return on investment. Okay, so here are some of the key transitions from a marketing practice point of view. Okay, so from a segmentation point of view, we really need to move away from segments or mass market concepts into more niche or even customer of one. Okay, so this is the world of mass customization. And the implication actually is that there's really this phenomena now of micro branding. Micro branding. So I think what's going to happen is that as we discover new segments, our old branding might have been one brand for everybody. But in the future, what might happen is that now we have a hierarchy or an umbrella or a house of brands where my old brand is now the umbrella brand, but underneath I have a lot of micro brands that are relevant to different segments of society. Okay. And one favorite example I have is never before in the history of the Philippines have we had as many people who are retired and above 65 years old. I think right now we have more than 10 million people that are older than 65 years old. Never before have we had that many. And I seriously doubt whether there are a lot of tourism experiences that are explicitly designed for that segment. And I'm pretty sure right now, given the fact that they're also in their minds victims of social distancing, unique victims of social distancing because they are not allowed to go out, that there is also a very strong pent-up demand among that segment for certain kinds of tourism experiences. Okay. So the first transition is micro brands in the concept of niches. Okay. The second one is we have to move away from transactional relationships to deeper, more intimate relationships that are able to build mutual trust. Okay. So if I want to spend a weekend somewhere, if I wanted to travel somewhere, in 2020, I really have to trust my service provider. I really have to trust the brand that I'm working with. So the implication is I just don't want an email, confirming something. I really need to have that human connection that's giving me the assurance that everything will be okay. So the customer journey moving forward, so we're moving away from standardized journeys and hopefully moving more into more customized, more transparent, more information-rich journeys. Okay, so we need more information to know that yes, your staff, they're safe from COVID, or I need more information that yes, your food is safe. Okay, or your food was sourced from the right sources. Okay, so there's a lot of content and storytelling and listening that's needed to inform customers along that customer journey. Okay, so from a needs point of view, we have to reframe traditional needs into re-emerging or the new emerging needs. So that's a reframing issue. In terms of destinations, I think we were quite big on the mega hubs. And I think that's still important, right? Because if we can scale mega hubs, then that has a larger impact faster. But we also need to consider diversifying our investments into smaller niche destinations or slices of destinations to create more meaning in microplaces. Okay. So, again, we are 7,107 islands, and the opportunity to create micro destinations and smaller businesses, but in a larger portfolio, I think is happening today. Okay. And then, of course, solutions. Primarily, we used to be service led. Maybe now we need to diversify more into product side of the business. And then revenue model. Maybe we had a very narrow revenue model before. When I say narrow, meaning we just would charge a fee for a service, and then we would have to recruit a lot of customers to earn a lot of money. Maybe now we need to reshape the revenue base and try to get a deeper share of the pocket over a longer period of time, but maybe focus on less customers. Okay. So here are some key transitions that I would hope that you would consider. And from a mindset point of view, I like this effectual thinking approach. So you can screenshot this, and there's probably not enough time now, but effectual thinking basically says when you're experimenting, don't think about the things that you don't have. Okay. Always start the experiments with the resources that are already with you and leverage those resources to create something of value. Okay. So here it's like means, right? Look at your existing means, your existing resources. Try to create something and prove that it has value. That's a goal. And when you prove that it has value, then you can show it to other people, okay, like buyers, or you can show it to other sellers for partnership or other customers and have those interactions like what you're having now in the travel exchange. And hopefully get new commitments. Okay. So maybe you're going to meet some people today. Maybe they're not going to buy from you, but hopefully they're going to be like willing to partner with you to help you leverage some of the assets or resources that you have, like your database. Okay. So I don't think I'm going to be able to effectively go into detail when it comes to effectual thinking, but I do recommend that if you can screenshot this, and then when you have free time, do a little bit more research and watch some videos about effectual thinking. Hopefully that's going to change your mindset and make you feel less helpless and make you feel more empowered to do the experiments that you need to do. All right. And then, of course, build, test, learn. So again, in the concept of experimentation, build something, test it in the real market, and then learn from the response that you get from people. Okay. So that's it. So it's 11:47. It took me about a little longer, so an hour and 10 minutes. So I just want to emphasize again that I empathize with all of you. I've worked in this industry for a long time. I love this industry a lot. And I know that there are different kinds of people here. It's a very diverse community, very diverse industry. But I'm empathizing with all of you, and I would be very, very happy to engage with you now during Q&A or later. And if you want later, feel free to email me, or if you want, you can add me on your social network, message me, or on Twitter, etc. So on that note, salamat.
Professor Cruz. Now, I have some questions from our listeners. So let me ask the first question here. So it says, you mentioned earlier that Facebook may not be that conducive anymore because of the signal to noise ratio. In evaluating other social media platforms with a wide reach, how do you go about studying whether or not a platform is good for business and marketing or just for social media? Because a good example that comes to mind is TikTok. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I think when when you talk about evaluating social media, you have to be very clear at which stage of the funnel are you using that platform for. Okay. So I think TikTok is quite good if it's really more from just an awareness or discovery point of view. I think um, if for some reason you believe that your customer, your target segment are the segments that um, watch or consume a lot of TikTok, and you feel like you're able to insert somehow your brand there, it's just really a place where product discovery can happen. And then hopefully they will be so intrigued that they will maybe go like to search. So maybe Google search after, or maybe they'll try to find you on Instagram. Okay. So I guess what I'm trying to say is you have to be very clear about what a specific social platform or social media platform's role is in the whole journey, in the whole conversion journey. If it's a get journey, so normally I would say TikTok is for acquisition of new customers, right? Because you're really going for people who you don't have a relationship with as of now. If you already have a relationship with them, then maybe you can send them an email or ask them to follow you on your Instagram or your IGTV. I would prefer video actually. So, the thing about Facebook now, especially now, is that it's really being bombarded by advertising, um, you know, for many reasons like politics, elections in the US, etc. So the noise level, I think, on Facebook is quite high. Actually, for me, Facebook is not a very pleasant uh, experience anymore. I just stay there because I have so many connections on Facebook. But the reality is, I spend more time on other platforms like YouTube or IG or Twitter, simply because maybe Twitter is also quite toxic. But you have a limit on Twitter; it can't be too long. But the basic answer there, it has to align with, it has to be clear which step in the conversion process are you using, which digital asset or social media platform.
Thank you, Professor. On a related note to that first question, when do you or how do you evaluate when to pull the plug if you have limited resources?
Well, I would say that there's a criteria um, that we should use when comparing different options in terms of like where should I invest my money. Okay. And I would say that it has something to do with how much excitement can you create and how much impact could that investment have. Okay. So there's a, I think there's a framework called ICE, the ICE formula. So you can maybe Google that instead. I don't have it right now on my slide, but I think it measures things like impact and how expensive it is, etc. And it kind of gives you the cost benefit analysis that you need to do for each channel choice or investment that you need to make. Okay, when you say when your resources are low, again, no, and you say should I pull the plug? As I was saying earlier, for me, my number one recommendation is leverage your existing database. Okay. Leverage your existing database. Even if you have to spend a little money to recreate. I mean, I'm sure some people are saying there, yes, we have a database, but it's not organized or it's not accessible, etc. Still, from the point of view of the customer that's been to your property in the past or to your business in the past, if you reach out to them, they will understand who you are and what you are. And I think they would be a little bit more open to engaging with you rather than going out into the wild and trying to acquire new customers out of the blue, because there's so much competition now for just trying to get some attention from people. It's very difficult. I mean, it's really it's really challenging now. So hopefully you have a database. If not, I think I think right now Facebook is a fairly risky proposition. You need to leverage your friends on Facebook. You need to leverage people who have existing network on Facebook. You can't just go and pay for an ad and expect people will just go to your company page right now. I think there's just too many. Everybody has their own. I'm sure if I did a survey here, how many pages are you managing for each person here? I'm sure, there's probably 3 or 4 pages per person here. Okay. So we have to make a more structured approach to that decision making.
Thank you, sir. Now, our next question is this. Considering the present situation, the travel businesses are now in, so it's an unforeseen and worse competitor. The market is skeptical on traveling. Airlines in other countries of destinations are not open yet for leisure. So what is your recommended marketing or advice for the travel businesses should do at the present time?
Okay. So I would say that the foreign inbound is really dictated by larger issues, right? When it comes to being able to get airlines to land and take off from different destinations coming here. So I think that that's going to happen more at the national level, country to country or region to region, city to city. But if I was a smaller operator, obviously I think you need to look at which market currently has access to you, right? Which market as of today either has digital access or physical access to you. And my strong belief actually is that if you're just looking at the Metro Manila market, uh, they will be looking for travel destinations, and they are really hungry for travel destinations. But most likely, it's going to have to be a driving distance away, right? So all of the provinces that have micro destinations, I would begin advertising that as soon as now, because I think most of the travel money that will be spent, especially if we talk about Philippines and Metro Manila, it's going to be a driving distance away. I'm not sure about perhaps it will be the same maybe in some of the larger cities in Mindanao. And of course, in the Visayas, I think, when you look at the ferry system and the boat system, again, the secret really is just to understand which markets have physical access to you as of today.
All right. Thank you. And sir, the next question is, let me see. With the move to focus on domestic tourism, but not affording to forget about marketing and promotions for international tourists, what metrics would be ideal to use to justify investments on these kinds of projects?
Yeah. So I'm a big believer in brand owners making sure that they continuously educate their market abroad about what's happening to the brand now. There has to be an update in terms of what's happening. We need to build on the existing brand equity. I know the Philippines again was like one of the top destinations, desired destinations before the pandemic. I hope that will continue after the pandemic. I hope that the desire for a lot of foreign travelers to still come will be high. And that's only going to happen if they feel secure during this period and they feel like they understand what was happening to the Philippines during this time. I follow a lot of foreign travel vloggers that are currently located in the Philippines. And when I watch their vlogs, which is directed towards a foreign audience, I do see that they're able to communicate that message to the market abroad, that what's happening in the Philippines is actually not so different from what's happening in their own countries, and that there's a lot of empathy. But what's important is that the information is updated. Now, how do you justify that from a marketing, from a financial point of view? Well, maybe that's what I'm saying. That maybe you need to find new ways to engage those foreign customers. Maybe if it were me, I would say in the past, if I had a beach resort and we had like a Friday night event with singers and dancers, maybe I will have to test whether my market is still engaged by doing that event online and seeing if I can get a good global audience to engage with my brand. So right now, the idea really is brand engagement. If you can get people to attend your online event, that for me is a good metric of interest and brand equity. Uh, Even if you're not able to fully monetize and convert it yet to revenue, that brand awareness is an asset that you can leverage. And that's why I was saying that if you can find a way to transition into the product business, then maybe there's a way to monetize your brand awareness by shipping products to them abroad, so that there's some kind of monetization that can also happen. We need to be very creative here because I'm sure this is not something that tourism organizations have relied on in the past for revenue. But in today's day and age, we really need brands. The brands can still thrive, actually. It's just that we need to find a new way to monetize the brand equity.
Yes, sir. Next question is, let me see. Given that the majority of the casino properties are closed up to now and waiting for travel restrictions to be lifted to MGCQ so they could operate at 50% capacity, and also PAGCOR also needs to give them the go signal. How can we maximize the online marketing platform to lure in more local guests into their respective properties?
Yeah, so that's what I was saying, that I would be that would be an opportunity to experiment in terms of like what experiences or products or messages would work using your digital platforms. So what would happen there for me is, so I don't have one particular answer, but I do have like a methodology, and the methodology should be, you approach it maybe with some kind of calendar or schedule where you're designing different offerings and seeing which one engages the domestic market, and then try to see how to build a business model out of that. So it's I think the secret there is quantity and velocity. I don't think I don't think you're going to find out before you launch it whether it's going to be successful or not. You're only going to find out after you launch it. So do everything, right? Leverage your theater, leverage your concert, but you'll have to find a way to deliver it in a way that's acceptable, based on the local regulation, or food, or entertainment, or any other thing, education. Um, so the other thing is that you might want to bring in a different team to brainstorm, because maybe your existing team is optimized for maybe the old experiences. Maybe it would help you once in a while to bring in other people from outside, just so that there's a different perspective in how you can leverage your existing physical and digital assets, while you are looking for ways to just de-stress in a nice way. And I'm sure that they would be willing to pay some money to do that.
Sir, I have two more questions for you before I let you go. The first one is, any recommendations for SME travel agencies since they have really limited resources for experimenting with the market?
Yeah, I would try to partner. Well, one off the top of my head, I would try to partner with LGUs and see whether there's some kind of business that can be created with LGUs to help them market their potential destinations in their places. So I speak to a lot of LGUs, and a lot of them are very interested in developing this local business, but their weakness is they don't necessarily have good access to market. So that's one. I would really explore how you can help promote products and services that are related to tourism from different LGUs. So I think you need more. You need to tap into the supply side and see what can you sell that might be easier to sell given the restrictions and the regulations, compared to what were used to selling in the past. I'm bullish on the demand side. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say. I'm bullish on the demand side. I think the pivot has to happen on how we configure the supply side.
All right, sir. Last question that I have here, it says, for social media marketing that deals with sales funnels, is it better to lead the funnel to your company website, or is it better to lead the funnel to, say, a marketing platform that sells group discount vouchers?
Um, okay. So the advantage of going to another platform that has group discounts is that you can reach a wider market faster, but I think that the margins for you will be smaller. So if you're a boutique property with some kind of premium positioning, I would argue that having your own direct channel in the long run will be better. So meaning, like, if you don't build your reliance on an external channel partner early, that will force you to become more self-resilient, self-reliant on channel earlier. I think in the long run that is better. But again, if you have a large capacity and you need a high velocity of customers, then that's where I think the reliance on, let's say, the OTAs as an example, would come in handy. But if you're a small property, I would really try to market and position yourself based on your unique proposition and then based on a more direct
So,
channel.
sir, very, very last question, just a quick one. Someone just posted this. For events, do you have any recommendations or ways so that they can market their clients' products, especially for clients who have marketing restrictions, for example, tobacco or milk formulas?
Yeah, so I think it's challenging, right? Because tobacco, um, it's challenging in the sense that number one, I think that lifestyle wise, it's really a little difficult to find a way to insert that product into the lifestyle right now. With milk formula, I would say that I believe that there's an opportunity there in the sense that if you genuinely cared about mothers, breastfeeding mothers, and you tried to help them, the reality is breastfeeding mothers cannot breastfeed forever. So at some point, they're gonna have to buy that category at some point, right? So unlike cigarettes, it's very possible for people to never go into that category. But for breastfeeding mothers, I believe in the best interest of the mother, it's also not good that she keeps on breastfeeding forever. So I think there's a more authentic way to educate mothers and somehow build a relationship that is not self-serving and more authentic, but it's still against the law basically in the Philippines. No, so even if you can do it authentically, the law still doesn't allow it because they don't trust the manufacturers to do so. I think in tobacco it's a little bit difficult. I still remember um, that there were a lot of tobacco companies going into sports marketing. I myself have a lot of experience in sports marketing, but I think the reality is the next generations perhaps are maybe not as exposed to the cigarette brands. So it doesn't add a lot of value to the experience, to the sports fan or the sports participant experience when the sponsor is a tobacco company. So I think it's getting more challenging to do that. And of course, they're getting disrupted by all the jewels and all of those things, right? So, excuse me.
So, sir, before I let you go, do you have any final message to our viewers, like where they can reach you? Maybe you can tell them what your email address is again if they think of any other questions after we're done with the session.
Sure. So I just want to thank all the organizers, Department of Tourism, Tourism Promotion Board. I want to thank you so much for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. And to everybody who listened this morning, thank you so much for your time. Um, I would be very happy to receive emails from you. My email address at AIM is rcruz@aim.edu. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn or on Instagram. FB right now is a little difficult for me because my FB is a little crowded, but an email would do great, and I would just be happy to meet new people and also network. So even if you don't have a real problem, if you feel like you want to network with me, I'd be very happy to receive an email from you. So that's rcruz@aim.edu. And yeah, we can always have some kind of inuman on the side, digital inuman. I don't know if there's an inuman event here. I did see the music and the singing last night, so congratulations. I was not part of that. But maybe we can find some other way to network. So on that note, I wish all of you good luck in your conference. I'm very happy that this was organized, even though it seems to be very impossible times. And I'm very optimistic for the industry, and I hope that you find many answers during the next 2 days. So on that note, thank you, and thank you so much for moderating this session.
So thank you once again, Professor Richard L. Cruz of the Asian Institute of Management. And thank you everyone for joining us for the first webinar for this FITEX 2020. So once again, if you have any further questions for Sir Richard, feel free to send him an email. Or if you have any other questions for the conduct of this event, feel free to reach out to the organizers with the FITEX team. And with that, thank you once again and keep safe. We're hoping to see you all in our next webinar sessions. Thank you and bye-bye.